Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. There's been a remarkable string of rising black power moves in New York, and if news reports are right, we may see yet another example very soon. According to the New York Times, the New York Daily News, and others, New York Governor Kathy Hochul may be very close to picking her new lieutenant governor. According to sources, she's set to name State Senator Brian Benjamin to fill the state's second highest ranking role. Benjamin, who is a Harvard graduate, is currently the senior assistant majority leader in New York State Senate. He represents Harlem and sections of Washington Heights and has served in the state Senate since 2017. Benjamin is a progressive Democrat and has pushed for legislation on prison and criminal justice reform this past year. Benjamin will only be the second black man to ever hold a lieutenant governor's job in New York after David Paterson, who held the role in 2007. Paterson went on to become governor after Eliot Spitzer resigned in the wake of a prostitution scandal. Over in Georgia, we have a different play for black power. After months of speculation, former NFL star and Trump ally Herschel Walker announced he's filed the paperwork to officially run in the Georgia Senate race. Although Walker grew up in Georgia, he has lived in Texas for decades and has never run for office before. If Walker would win the primary, he would face off against freshman Senator Raphael Warnock, who earlier this year became the first black man to win his seat. Joining me now to discuss is senior writer for TheRoot.com, Michael Harriot, and associate professor of political science at Howard University, Niambi Carter. So I guess I'll start with you, Michael. What do you, when you look around at all the things happening with black people in power and elections, how do you assess the state of black power? This is not just these two things I just mentioned today. It is very possible that we have a black governor of California even.
Well, I think what we see is black people not just learning how to gain power and increase that power, but how to wield it, right? So it's not just that, a black woman was positioned to take the place of governor, right? But she is using her position to increase black power by selecting someone we always say, well, black people vote for black people because of race, as if for the history of America that white people haven't voted for white people, haven't pulled white people into the halls of power because of the same thing, because of who they are comfortable with, because of who they relate to. And we see the same thing. And so I think what we're seeing now is not just the acquisition of power, but the increasing of it and knowing how to wield it for our political advantage.
Niambi, in the case of New York, is it possible that Hochul is picking Benjamin basically to kind of nullify or blunt the impact that other black candidates might have? For instance, the Attorney General of the state, a black woman, is thought to want to run for governor. Is this a way of just saying, we pick somebody from Harlem so the person from Brooklyn will not have that much power in the black community?
It's possible that Hochul was making that calculation, but I think these are very different black people, quite frankly. They're not the same kind of candidate. So it's not clear that simply picking this black lieutenant governor will quiet those calls for black people in the state of New York who've been really shut out when you think about the power structure of the state of New York. Even though black people make up about 15-16% of the population, they really not ascended to the higher echelons of that state's political forces. So until recently. So I think this will not necessarily keep a person like a Tish James from being able to really make some inroads if she decides that she wants to run for governor, given her presence, given the impact that she's made. I mean, I think she's going to be a force to be reckoned with no matter who is black and in number 2 position in that office. So I think this is going to be, it could be a calculation, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to stave off the steam that a Tish James governorship might be gaining in that state.
Michael, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Walker and his wife are being investigated because Walker's wife voted in Georgia in 2020 election, even though their residency is in Texas. Walker changed his residency from Texas to Georgia last week, But how does this play when, Georgia is cracking down on what they think is fraudulence in elections, and the whole Republican Party is saying we don't want voter fraud. And what it looks like is that this may turn out to be a case of voter fraud, someone voting in a state where they are not a resident.
Well, it just exposes the hypocrisy of that whole Republican brand, right? And this is what they do, right? They stand for something until it doesn't benefit them, and then they'll throw it in the garbage. And then it's not just Herschel Walker's wife registering and voting in Georgia. But remember the big argument that the Republicans had in Georgia, and part of the bill that they passed, the law that became the bill that became a law restricting the voting rights of Black people, was that they were afraid that people were moving to Georgia just to vote. So there's a provision in that bill that says you have to live in Georgia for a certain amount of time before you could vote. And it echoes back to the Civil War, the post-Civil War accusation of carpetbaggers and scalawags. So we see them not just, tossing that whole agenda to the side for their political advantage, but it shows that they don't really want to protect the vote. They just want to gain a political and numerical advantage so they can maintain their power.
Yeah, but what is your thought on the GOP just scratching up any Black candidate they can find to run against other Black candidates who have been successful on the Democratic side? This is not new. I mean, they found, I think Alan Keyes, when he ran against Obama, yes, was a resident of Maryland. Now we have Herschel Walker, who's a resident of Texas, and they've scratched him up to send him to Georgia to try to run against Raphael Warnock. What do you think about this strategy of just trying to replace one Black face with another?
Well, I mean, I think this is sort of the GOP's misunderstanding of Black voters. So if your assumption is that Black people will vote for anybody Black just because they're Black, then yes, any old Black person will do. But that's not the kind of calculations that most Black people are making at the polls. And so we see, an Alan Keyes who couldn't get elected dog catcher in the state of Maryland. They, in a cynical ploy, sent him to Illinois to take down Barack Obama, and we see how that turned out. I think Herschel Walker is going to be similar, because I don't know that the voters of Georgia, and again, Herschel Walker's voters won't largely be Black people. They will be white folks, white Republicans in particular, in the state of Georgia, who want someone they can vote for who happens to be Black, right? And so he might fit the bill there. So it's not clear how that will play in Georgia, particularly given the fact that Herschel Walker has not been a resident of that state for a very long time. It's not clear that even maybe white voters will come out, white Republican voters in particular will come out for that person who, I mean, clearly is just here because it's like, I want to run against the other Black guy. I think if the Republicans had the strength of their convictions, they would run their best candidate. Herschel Walker is not their best candidate. Neither was an Alan Keyes.
Michael, what is your take on that strategy by the GOP?
Well, it just shows kind of their base misunderstanding of Black people in general, right? Republicans really just want to throw a face of Blackness on white supremacy, so to gain their political advantage. But I think it might backfire because, we like to say there's a percentage of Republicans that are just racist, but, nowhere is that truer than Georgia. Some people might not be motivated to go vote because their candidate is a Black person. So I think it might backfire. You can't just throw any Black person into the mix because the sophisticated Republican voters won't be motivated to vote for them, and the real racist ones on the other end of the spectrum won't be motivated to vote for them. So all you'll have is that really diehard Republican base, and who knows if they'll be willing to vote, because a lot of those people believe that elections are rigged and stolen anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you this last question because I want to just pitch forward a little bit. We got to pull out our crystal ball and think about what the future could look like, because I feel like this strategy will be used again. I think that Nikki Haley is basically waiting in the wings in case there is ever a Kamala Harris candidacy, so the Republicans lift up and say, "Oh, you have a woman of color? We have one too," and that negates that proposition. Is that how they think about things in those simplistic of terms?
Well, I'm sure for the higher ups, they probably are thinking about it on a deeper level. But I do think that they think that's how most people in the citizenry think about politics. It's like it's a brown person; they're interchangeable. Of course, their politics are the same. Or it's a brown person. I can feel good voting these politics because people can't say any longer that my party is racist or at the very least racialist, right? Because we put this person of whatever origin, right? And I think that has played out over and over again with this party that moved away from being a big tent a really long time ago and is now sort of cramming all these sort of get and really making this party of grievance right now. And I think has very limited opportunities for this party over the longer term.
Michael, Harriot, and Niambi Carter, always a pleasure, always insightful. Thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. The U.S. military is about to mandate vaccination. Details on that story next on Prime. You're watching BNC.